Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Defining Preferred with the PFM Matrix. Today's presentation will be recorded and sent out to all registered participants and also will be posted on the Hub. We have a Q&A portion throughout this presentation. You can type your questions into the question box on the webinar doc. Now on to Ashley Gill with Textile Exchange. Ashley?
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for the introduction, Rose. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We're really excited to give you a progress update on the preferred fiber and material matrix by Textile Exchange. And we've got some we have a great guest with us today, and I'll go into those introductions in just a little bit. But I first just wanted to give a really brief intro to what the tool is, why Textile Exchange is excited about it, and kind of where we are at in the progress of the tool. So the preferred fiber material matrix is a holistic assessment tool that provides the industry with a more holistic view on impact areas and risk areas across the fiber material portfolio. It captures our LCA approach by combining both that kind of quantitative LCA information with qualitative indicators that are not typically captured in LCAs. So things like program requirements, biodiversity, soil health, some of those things that maybe can't be captured in those LCAs. It shows how different materials within a specific material category perform across a range of impact indicators. We've included climate, biodiversity, soil health, and water as part of Textile Exchange's Climate Plus commitment, but we've also included other impact indicators like animal welfare, human rights, and others. I think if I want to talk about why Textile Exchange is really excited about this tool, we're mostly excited because this is one of our we've announced the Climate Plus goal last year, and this is one of our most practical tools that we're releasing in kind of in response or as an implementation of that Climate Plus strategy. So it's really enabling us to deepen our definition of preferred fiber materials to include that LCA information to help us stay on track with what the materials are that are actually delivering those greenhouse gas emission reductions, but also offers that, what I mentioned before, that LCA plus approach to combine with that quantitative information, some of these more qualitative areas. We're hoping that we'll be able to use that tool to really allow the industry to drive towards Climate Plus outcomes with the fiber materials that they choose. We also want them to be able to identify where their current portfolio might have risk areas and to see examples of programs or initiatives that could help address those specific impact areas or risk areas. It provides, I think it also provides for not just for brands and retailers that are looking for what fibers and materials to add into their portfolio, but it also offers that same direction of travel for fiber programs, for fiber initiatives, standards owners, and also material suppliers to be able to identify what they need to do to kind of move towards more of those Climate Plus outcomes. I mentioned our Climate Plus goal, and Textile Exchange has set an ambitious target of driving a 45% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And we've taken this in what we've called the Climate Plus, and the plus in Climate Plus is really, like I mentioned before, combining that quantitative LCA information with some of these more qualitative indicators that are hard to capture in these measurements. So our primary focus is on carbon, biodiversity, soil health, and water. But you'll see in the tool that it's really something that captures that holistic view of all of those things together. So where are we in the process? So we held a public consultation earlier this year from December to January of this year, and got a lot of feedback on the methodology, on the data sources that we were using, and the material categories. And we've worked through updating our methodology and coming out with these assessments within material categories. And what we're doing now this week is a soft launch of the tool with our steering committee, with a key group of stakeholders. And we really want to take this opportunity to sense check some of the outcomes and to do a really robust round of user testing before it's publicly released. So any feedback that we receive in this portion of the process, any adjustments that we make, we'll share all of that. We'll keep a record of feedback. We'll keep a record of any updates that we make. And then once the tool is publicly available, you'll be able to see all of that and benefit from the additional user testing that some of these stakeholders are providing for us. One of our most crucial contributions to the process so far has been the contribution of Gap Inc. And Textile Exchange worked with Diana, with Gap Inc. In the past to help them develop their preferred fiber toolkit, which was essentially kind of the first step in combining these quantitative and qualitative indicators to get a more robust view of what materials they should be including in their portfolio. And Diana has been part of our steering committee that we pulled together to kind of figure out, like, what is the tool that Textile Exchange needs to develop here? What is really the need of the industry? And we had some one-on-one conversations, and the end result was that Gap actually ended up giving us that preferred fiber toolkit. And that provided this really, it was a foundation that we could really build on and kind of tweak and adjust based off of our knowledge, based off of some of the, the information innovation that has changed in the meantime. And so I'm really, really happy that we've got Diana on the call with us today. And Diana is a senior manager of product sustainability at Gap Inc. And she's worked there for almost 5 years, but she's been working in sustainability for closer to around 10 years. She's a sustainability expert focused in systems development for business integration, raw material, and supply chain impact. And I was reading through, Diana, I was reading through your LinkedIn page, and I saw you use this phrase that I love, which was optimistic pragmatism. And I, first of all, think that perfectly captures you. And it also, I think, is kind of it's just a lovely thing to think about as we go forward with this tool, that it's, it is based in optimism, and it's based in also kind of having both feet on the ground of we're really excited about where we can go, but we are basing it in, these really scientific database solutions. So it's a little bit of a corny plug there, but I loved that phrase. I also have with me today Sienna Shepard, who is our Climate Plus strategy manager. She's been with Textile Exchange since last year, which is shocking. It feels like she's been with us for much longer than that. But she's been a really crucial part of the team that's been working on the Climate Plus strategy rollout. She's got a really broad background. She's worked in the apparel sector. She's managed a materials library at Parsons, and she's also worked on communication strategy. She has done a lot of heavy lifting on this project, and she knows it very, very well. So we're really happy to have her there. And if you don't know me, I'm Ashley Gill. I'm the Director of Standards at Textile Exchange. I've also been working quite a bit on our the development and kind of thinking around our Climate Plus strategy, how it might affect some of our other areas of work. And while I haven't been as involved as Sienna, I still have been kind of working on the preferred fiber material matrix for the past year or so as well. So I'm going to jump in a little bit to a conversation. I've got some questions for Sienna, and I then will follow up with some questions for Diana. But I thought we would use this as just kind of a way to tease out some of the details of the tool, some of the thinking behind it, and what we're really most excited about. So Sienna, my first question is for you. Can you tell us a little bit about how the tool has been designed, and how the materials are categorized?
Yeah, so the tool is designed around core material categories. So we began with 5 areas: cotton, synthetics, man-made cellulosics, flax, and wool. And the tool is designed to view materials within their material category. So different types of cotton are compared to different types of cotton, but not against synthetics or against flax, and similarly across these other material categories. And then we wanted to take a really holistic approach to looking at each of these material categories by looking at a number of different impact areas. So we cover everything from human rights and waste all the way through a variety of environmental impact areas, which are climate, water, chemicals and toxicity, land use, and biodiversity. And then the other kind of key component worth sharing is that we also have animal welfare for wool. And then within all of our categories, we have an indicator called initiative integrity, which really looks at dependability, management systems, chain of custody and verification, and elements like that.
Great. And so it sounds like, I mean, I've mentioned in the past, like the qualitative and the quantitative indicators. Can you talk a little bit more about the sources of data that we've pulled in for the tool, and how they, how they kind of come together?
Yeah, so the tool is designed around to use 3 different types of data sources that cover the qualitative and the quantitative. So in terms of quantitative data, we're pulling data points from the Sustainable Apparel Coalition's HIG MSI, and using this allows us to have some quantified impact as well as balanced out by our qualitative data points. So in terms of qualitative information, we pull from 2 main sources, or have developed 2 main sources. One is the WWF certification assessment tool, and the other is a set of custom, what we'll call custom indicators that began in the GAP toolkit and have been developed, updated, or added to by Textile Exchange throughout this process. And so the kind of the core difference between the CAT indicators and our custom indicators is that the CATS looks exclusively at program requirements. And so it only allocates points based off of mandatory program requirements. There are yes, no questions, and there are 180 questions across the CATS, half of which look at impact and outcomes and the requirements related to those. And the other half look at what would be bucketed under initiative integrity. And so we've got chain of custody and those sorts of questions there. The CATS also is universal, more or less, except for the last 10 questions, which are differentiated between forestry and agricultural systems. And it's a completely desk-based research project based off of publicly available information, and has gone through a stakeholder review process that's through WWF. You can learn more about it on their website. And then the custom indicators are slightly different in that they look a little bit more holistically at not just program requirements, but also allocating points and considering guidance, recommendation, and support systems that lead to standard practice. And these are scored along a continuum of 0 to 100 points based off of how much the program demonstrates best-in-class performance in relationship to that indicator, such as, alternate plowing techniques or sustainable use of surface or groundwater. And I think the other thing that's worth noting is part of the reason that we use the CATS is because as a standards body, we felt like it was really important to create some separation between the assessment of standards and ourselves. I want to pass that back to you, Ashley, actually, because you work in standards much more than I do, to maybe elaborate a bit more.
Yeah, sure. So you'll see in the, in the tool, we've really assessed primarily programs and initiatives that are like standards. So Textile Exchange's standards are included in this assessment. And, we really, through the years that we've been working with ISEAL, we've really come to appreciate and understand the difference between having the criteria or having the program requirements and then sort of the supporting structure that you have around that. So program robustness, things like how is it verified? Is there transparency in that decision-making process? Is there representation? Is it a representative standard that allows for stakeholders across the supply chain to participate? So we really understand and know that all of those elements are really important. And at the same time, because we own those standards, we don't necessarily want to be the ones saying like, yes, this is good enough, and no, this isn't. And so allowing us to pull in the CATS from this, from WWF's perspective, has really enabled us to still include those data sources and those indicators, We know that, there's not CATs currently for all the programs and initiatives that we really want to include. And so we're kind of looking at what that might mean and if there are other ways that we can get those programs represented. But we felt like it was really important for Textile Exchange not to be making the decision of what was good enough for a standard or initiative. Obviously, I personally, as the director of standards, love our standards, but it shouldn't be up to me to make that decision. So we're really, really happy to have that kind of accountability there. I don't know, Sienna, if you want to jump back into talking a little bit. You mentioned at the beginning the 5 core material categories. Do you want to talk a little bit more about those? And sorry about that. And maybe what the future of those materials might be.
Yeah, so I mentioned we started with 5 core impact materials: cotton, synthetics, man-made cellulosics, flax, and wool. We really intend for these to grow. We know that there are other fibers that are core fibers within the industry, but building out a tool like this, especially the MVP, we wanted to make sure we didn't bite off the entire world to chew for it and start with just some core fibers that were accessible through CATs and other means. Kind of similarly with our impact areas. So we started with 8 core impact areas plus initiative integrity and then animal welfare where it's relevant. And each of these impact areas is made up of sub-indicators. So the indicators within each impact area kind of break out into more detail. For example, within land use, we have indicators related to deforestation, forest management, soil health, and those indicators come from a variety of sources. So under land use, there'll be some that come under the CATs, like soil risk mitigation and alternate plowing techniques and crop rotation. Those will be custom indicators. Similarly, when it's available, there are the MSI data points as well. So we have the standard data points available through the MSI, which are greenhouse gas emissions, fossil fuel resource depletion, water use, water consumption, and then they have a chemistry score as well. And so we have, I believe, 65 indicators across the tool within those categories, and that's before initiative integrity, which I believe adds about 20 more. And within each of those indicators, there are obviously 180 CATs. So the CATs are grouped by subject area as well within that. And the thought is the more data points you can get, really the more you can guard against too much bias and really work to have a holistic picture. We know that the tool isn't going to be perfect, but that's why we're so interested in expanding our data points over time, having more indicators, and really having this kind of comprehensive review right now, looking and saying, are all the assumptions we're making, is the way that the model is built sound? And are we comfortable with it going out to the public? So I'm really excited to kind of bring it to that next level and share it with everyone.
Yeah, I told everyone that you knew the most detail about this, and you're definitely proving me right. I wonder, you talked a little bit about what we've kind of seen as we've pulled all of these different data sources together. And I'm sure, Diana, you also experienced this in the kind of the first version of the tool, but I'm curious, like if you could share a little bit about what the team has learned around what it means and what it looks like to pull all of these different data sets together, how we're managing things like the weighting between different data sources or between different impact indicators. If you want to just speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's really valuable to kind of recognize or call out is that the reality of the programs on the ground are often difficult to capture in a tool like this. So most data sets don't include regional data, and that's a big reason why the tool at this stage is providing a global average, which again, at a global average, the variety of practices and implementations can really vary within a program, particularly in something like cotton, which is such an extensive farming practice. The matrix also works at the lowest common denominator. So we're looking at standard practice, but it's really only equipped to assess what a program requires or suggests and what ends up in that standard practice. So we recognize that so many times the practices on the ground in a production facility or in a farm will exceed that. And we're hoping to kind of build out the methodology and the approach over time to be able to capture some of that nuance. But as it stands, we'll be the first to say that a standard has a wide range of implementation practices, and some of them are going to exceed the standard baseline. And that's going to come into, having that relationship with your specific suppliers and recognizing what they're doing beyond that. So just because a material ends up in a banding, along the matrix doesn't mean that certain programs and suppliers don't exceed that. We actually anticipate that. Mm-hmm. And I would also add that that's the importance of storytelling, that the matrix is really a starting point. It helps you get an initial framing about the materials and understanding impacts. It allows you to see, okay, relative to other materials in that fiber type or category, where are the strengths and weaknesses for each program? One program may have more of a focus on water, but less of a focus on climate. And recognizing and kind of being able to see that high level view, I think, is really important for brands if they have certain goals and priorities related to certain impact areas. For example, we've focused on climate. So understanding which programs excel in climate versus other areas can be really valuable. And then you have to go back to, storytelling and engaging with your supply chain more directly to get that next level of nuance. Like, this tool is not going to do everything for you, and having that kind of next level of engagement is really critical. I think the other thing that probably a lot of people on this call are familiar with is, there's a lot of need to improve the data we have access to, particularly LCA data. There are programs in the matrix that don't have LCA data, and so we aren't able to capture that impact, or they particularly don't have LCA data in the MSI. And that's similar to the fact that we don't have programs included yet that don't have a CATS, and there is always going to be a next level of depth that you can analyze a program through. And so trying to get to at least a starting point that really brings just another level of depth to the industry's understanding, recognizing that we can always continue to drill down and do more, I think, is what I'm really excited about, is that it can always evolve and there's always more we can learn about and also communicate.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Sienna. I really appreciate you giving us all that additional detail. I'm going to move to you, Diana. I've got some questions for you. I'm wondering if you could tell us, just kind of walk us through a little bit of the history of the tool, of how it was, what needs really drove the creation of the tool at Gap.
Yeah, hi. I'm really glad to kind of bring in that brand perspective. And I'm also really excited for everything Sienna has shared, because we're really excited to use the new iteration of the matrix as well. The tool was really formed for that holistic reason. We couldn't rely on a single data set. We couldn't say, if it's in the MSI, we know what the impacts are going to be. There are so many different indicators. When we used the tool, we had, I think, 11 or 12 of them. Some of them kind of collapsed down, and it was basically us trying to say, we know there are climate impacts. We know there are water impacts. Those are relatively measurable compared to other indicators like land use change, end of life scenarios, things like that. But we also started to struggle with what the trade-offs were. So we as a company have a strategic focus on water conservation, water quality. And so we built in a little bit of a weighting system to allow us to say, what this product does, usually because we were focused on cotton, there's not a lot of climate information across different cotton categories, but we are able to look more thoroughly into the water pieces. And so being able to kind of say, we now have a more holistic view of all the different ways, or at least many of the different ways, that this raw material will impact the environment, will help us advise our designers, help us advise our fabric R&D teams. And so this tool was really built to support decision-making while producing the products we make. And so we kept getting questions that were coming to us of like, well, is organic linen better than organic cotton? And one thing we were really careful to do with this tool, while some categories are able to kind of be compared against each other, linen and cotton for us was one of those, we weren't going to compare a synthetic against a natural fiber because that's very rarely one of the trade-offs that our designers are bringing to us. You know, within synthetic categories, we were able to compare, you know, polyester to recycled polyester, both from a chemical or mechanical sense, but we weren't able to say like, oh yeah, you know, this is what organic cotton looks like compared to recycled polyester, simply because they're almost incomparable because the environmental impacts are so different. So what this tool really allowed us to do is say, this is our threshold for a preferred material. Here's our avoid category. Here's what we consider good. And then we have better, and then we have truly the best. And by setting that threshold, that also helped us manage our sustainability certification process by saying, you know, these ones that are on this list are the ones that we're going for. And here are the certifications that we'll kind of include and provide support for building into our supply chain. But it also allowed us to look at the other side of the claims process and say, you know, based on our preferred fiber toolkit, these are the fibers that we're going to let our marketing teams kind of make claims on, because we do want to celebrate the successes we're getting without necessarily having to tell like really expansive stories about, you know, everything involved in getting to responsible wool or organic cotton. So this threshold is allowing us to set goals. We have internal goals as well as mostly external goals that say, you know, for example, at Athleta, we, you know, aim to source 80% of our products, including at 30% or more preferred materials. So that threshold allowed us to say, these are the preferred materials, and these are the ones that are going to help us get to our, you know, our water strategy, our climate strategy, our chemistry strategy. And so being able to set those thresholds, communicate them really clearly throughout the whole company, and then now hopefully being able to align that threshold with a lot of the rest of the industry so that we're not all saying different things, our preferred fibers, helps us simplify our decision-making process and really focus on how do we get to better products as opposed to how are we just debating which materials to use.
Yeah, that we've spent a lot of time, I think, within thinking around the Climate Plus strategy and really understanding this sense of urgency that we really want to allow and enable the industry to move past that conversation of like, which is better? Is this better or why? Or like defending one material over another, and say like, we know which materials are kind of good enough at this point, but we need people to start adopting them and to start using them. So I love that kind of the ability to shift that conversation. I wondered also, Diana, if you could talk a little bit about maybe what the value is for Gap to have given the tool to Textile Exchange, and what you see the value of that will be for the industry.
Absolutely. You know, we had really, one of the biggest reasons we built this tool is, and built it out with a variety of indicators, qualitative and quantitative, was the understanding that we cannot wait for good data to exist before we start moving. That was something I remember a panelist said at the Textile Exchange conference a couple of years ago. While you're all talking about how better data is needed, we need to take action. And so being able to bring in those holistic indicators has really been a huge reason that this has been a useful tool for us. What we ran into as a company is that we did not have the visibility into all the different indicators that should be used, all the different standards and certification schemes and different varietals of you know, cotton production methods. So we recognized that more information was needed that we didn't have kind of an objective view into. As a brand, you know, we had to sign a lot of NDAs. We had to really kind of get a really big view and try to get producers to give us information, even if we might not be sourcing from them. And so by providing the tool to an independent, nonprofit, third party, that allowed for a sense of objectivity, that allowed for a much bigger aperture of indicator collection, and also allowed it to become something that wasn't just our tool, because we were starting to say, well, we've got an internal tool, but we don't know if we should be giving out to individual companies. We didn't want to be picking winners. We didn't want to be seen as arbiters of what was or wasn't the right way to go. And so by having Textile Exchange be the owner, and also within that kind of conversation of, we want to give you this gift of a tool, but we do recognize you hold the standards. So what's our firewall? What's our governance system to make sure that there isn't a system of preferability, that it is happening independent of the standards program? So we can keep those two as a separate thing. That allows for that objectivity to happen, and just a much bigger view of what's out there. I expect that a lot of the different materials evaluated, or the different production systems within the new matrix, as opposed to our toolkit, will be a lot bigger. We simply couldn't evaluate all the materials that are out there. And with the proliferation of new certification schemes, different initiatives, novel and nascent fibers, we were finding ourselves overwhelmed. And so TE's got their eyes on that kind of high level horizon view. So hopefully they'll be able to keep up much better than we ever were.
Yeah. Well, I think also, the feedback that we've heard from the industry is, Gap is fortunate that you had a team, you had resources that you could dedicate to develop this kind of tool, that you could provide that view to all of the different brands within Gap Inc. But there's a lot of companies that don't have those resources and don't have that ability to go through that really scientific based process. And so for Textile Exchange to kind of play that role, it allows those companies to still benefit and still take that action without necessarily maybe having the resources to go through that process on their own. And again, it's very duplicative. And if all these companies have their own methodology, their own kind of reasoning around how they're drawing those conclusions, we may end up, kind of missing things or talking about how those two tools compare to each other, rather than just adoption and moving forward with our goals. So we're really excited I think that's something that Textile Exchange does really well, is take the kind of the best learning from these companies that really have shown leadership and have made these great investments, and then apply, distribute that through the industry and allow more companies to benefit from that best practice. Because sustainability, I think our goals, we're going to get to them faster if we're not competing on sustainability issues. So I'm really, really excited about this. So now that Gap doesn't own this tool, and you're definitely part of our ongoing thinking partnership around the tools development, but how do you envision Gap interacting or engaging with this tool going forward? How will it be different than what you did in the past?
What you said is such a good point, is that, we have such lofty goals that we need to accelerate getting these into our supply chains, and spending less time individually kind of looking into standards and measuring them and figuring things out. So the way we really anticipate using the matrix going forward is kind of establishing it as our new threshold system. So instead of spending a lot of time internally saying, well, what about this material? What about that material? We'll be able to just say, this is what cottons are out there that we consider a preferred fiber. Here's maybe good, better, and best. And moving within those tiers, we're able to encourage our producers directly to say, we need more organic cotton in the world. We need to improve the recycling systems for polyester, because these are the materials that we need already. And then we'll be able to say to our product teams, our designers, here's your list of materials. We don't need to spend a whole bunch of time looking through them. What we can do is just move forward with sourcing them. And then what we're really excited to do was having somebody else kind of establish these thresholds, is we're moving on into how do we measure the impacts of our actions. So we're not going to be kind of looking into every single LCA or land use change indicator ourselves necessarily. We're going to be able to say, okay, within this standard, how are we calculating our transition? How are we understanding our climate change impacts? How are we calculating our water use impacts? And that way we'll be able to kind of move past just setting preferred fiber targets and be able to say, we have ambitious climate goals, we have ambitious climate or water goals. And with that, we'll be able to start kind of marching in that direction away from simply saying, you know, we're evaluating cotton and we'll get there.
Yeah. I also feel like it is very strange that I've let you go this long without explaining your beautiful background. That is not a fake background. That is a real background. You want to tell us where you are?
I am in Idaho.
Oh, it's great.
Enjoying the landscapes that we are trying to protect. So
oh yeah, and
I just now
it got clear enough to see that there's like a little bit of a mountain range behind you. That's amazing.
So, thanks for putting up with me while I deal with the rising sun.
Oh, it's fantastic. It's great. It's too hot in Texas to be outside, even at 9:30 in the morning. So
I'm getting that like side sunlight coming in on my face.
Yeah, as the sun rises on the West Coast, right, Sienna?
Yep.
Well, thank you both so much for sharing with that. I'm going to move into just some walking folks through the next steps for the tool, and then we have plenty of time for questions. So go ahead and start. If you've got any questions, feel free to drop those into the Q&A box, and I'll start monitoring them. I want to say we're sharing feedback this week, or we're sharing the tool with our group of stakeholders this week in this beta release. And I mentioned before, we'll take all of that feedback on board, kind of walk through it, get a sense check of our assumptions, of our weightings. And then we're really interested in also, I think in the future, understanding and learning from folks ways to broaden the tool, ways to potentially capture some of that impact information that maybe currently isn't available. You know, we talked a little bit about some of the limitations of both, you know, the CAT information that doesn't necessarily always capture the full picture. We also know that LCAs don't capture the full picture. There's a lot of, you know, things happening at regional levels, things happening between different materials. So anything, you know, feedback or input you have on how we might be able to improve that data, we're all ears. We definitely want to hear that. We're really committed to I think we just want to say we're really committed to this tool over time. And we really, you know, believe in the importance of the tool. We've talked a lot about the limitations of data, but we've also talked about the need to not let perfection stop us from action, that we have to move forward. We've got to start making decisions. We've got to start getting these materials into our supply chains in order for us really to achieve those climate goals. If you're interested in being part of this stakeholder process, just reach out to us and let us know. You can send an email to matrix@textileexchange.org, and we'll add you into to the process, give you a chance to look over the tool and provide feedback. And for now, I will go ahead and move into the questions. So feel free to drop any of your questions into the Q&A. And I've already answered, looks like, can I participate in the stakeholder process? That might've been an earlier one. So I've already mentioned that one. I will also mention when the tool will be released. Part of it depends a little bit on the feedback that we get. We want to make sure that we, if there is really, you know, we get a huge pushback for this one assumption, that we take the time to go through that process. But we are looking at probably just a few weeks, and we will be able to release that publicly. Another question is stakeholder participation restricted to current Textile Exchange members? And I would say probably we'll kind of cover that on a case-by-case basis. I think as long as folks have a legitimate interest, or, you know, they're connected to the outcome in some way, that we would be open to that. So I think that's great. Another question is, will brands or retailers be able to make product claims? You mentioned this a little bit, Diana, that you within GAP use it as a tool for product claims. Sorry about that. Sienna, do you want to take that question? So I can let my dog bark.
Yeah, so the tool is not intended for claims. basically, similar to any data set. The way that the tool is designed is to help you assess how a program performs and what their program requirements look like, but that's not tied to direct verification of outcomes. That's where the initiative integrity questions really come in to help you better understand what those systems look like, but they're not a verification methodology. And so as such, the tool is not intended for making any sort of claims.
And I'm happy to hop in and explain how we do, and let your dog finish. Zoom world. What's really important for us internally at Gap Inc. is to understand that a lot of the materials have their own claims guidances already. So the toolkit allows us to make choices based on which materials we want to use. But if we're using, organic linen, there are already claims guidance guidelines available through the standards that are coming through with that. Similarly, a lot of these materials will have licensing standards, and something like BCI cotton has very specific claims that can be made already. So the tool helps you make your selection, but the guidance itself will come through the material selected. And so in some ways, it doesn't simplify the claims process, but it does allow you to know, once you've selected your material, here's the different standards or licensing bodies that you'll need to work through to understand what you can and cannot say about those materials.
Yeah, that's a really helpful example. We've also provided some communication guidelines, because we know while we won't be allowing like references to the Textile Exchange preferred fiber material matrix on product, I think it's also possible that you might want to say on a corporate communication website page or something like that, that you are, committed to using the matrix, or that you're using that to help you kind of make those fiber selection decisions. That kind of communication, I think we would be fine with, and we've provided some guidance around how you might do that. But we are limiting it from product level claims. Another question is, would Textile Exchange consider the output information from this matrix to identify new fibers that need a standard? So I think, I think we don't have any foregone conclusions about what the output information will mean for us. I think we do want to, we've already talked about using the tool as a way to identify data sources that, that we can improve on, that we can build on. And I think there could also be a recognition that maybe there are some gaps in tools available to verify some of these. And, Textile Exchange is actually, you'll hear more about this from us in the coming months, but we're kind of looking at a way to incorporate Climate Plus more meaningfully into our standards. And part of it, I think, is going to be a recognition of what we've learned from this matrix process of where there might be gaps and where some of our standards are covering maybe a portion of the considerations, but there are big holes in what we could be including or capturing. And so I think we don't necessarily want to go into it with like which new standards should we create, but more of just the thinking of how can we influence, or how can we let what those gaps represent influence the direction of our standards. It's kind of a little bit of a vague answer, but I think we're open to conclusions.
Yeah, and I'd also add that I think like one of the strengths of the tool is it helps you kind of see the variety that can exist within standards. So you may be able to see, like, organic is a good example of something that doesn't have explicit requirements around human rights. That doesn't mean it's not an incredibly strong standard in other ways. So you'll see that represented in the tool based off of how the material program or standard performs in different impact areas. And I think that's one of the beauties of having kind of the bird's eye view, but also being able to drill down on the impact area level and then into this indicators, is to see that kind of variety. And so, it's not against reason that some things are stacked together. Like, you recognize that, this standard or program that I'm working in covers these impact areas that I'm interested in, but I also really want to make sure that there's a social component. So I'm going to work with this organization through my supply chain. as an example.
Yeah.
I think one of the benefits also that having kind of visibility and transparency into indicators provides is both for new materials, it allows brands to ask questions when we, without, kind of revealing any new materials, we get brought ideas of like, oh, this fiber, super sustainable all the time. And so having a tool allowed us to say, well, do you have life cycle information? What are your land management practices? Do you have animal welfare and social criteria? It allowed us to both know what questions we should be asking of new materials suppliers, but also by giving the tool to TE, by making the methodology transparent, it allows suppliers to know what we're going to ask for. And so I think allowing that level of, here's what you need to look into, here's what you need to provide before you start talking about your numerical fiber or your wonderful new standard without extra information will allow brands to adopt that material much more quickly as well. I think right now it's kind of felt a little bit like each brand has different expectations of proof. And hopefully this will help streamline that process so we can all just kind of keep moving forward.
Yeah, that's great. I'm going to direct this question to you, Sienna. Let's assume I am a fiber material provider. How can I make sure that I'm included or referenced in the preferred fiber material matrix?
Yeah, so I would say like the key point to remember there is that the matrix functions on a generic standard or program level. So this kind of comes back to the nuance that we're interested in exploring going forward in terms of you have a program like organic or FSC certified that's going to cover a portion of the supply chain and certain impact areas. And then there are going to be additional program differences based off of a specific supplier. I think man-made cellulosics is a good example because the CATs work at the forestry certification level. So you have, conventional viscose compared to FSC viscose. And then there are so many additional credentials that can happen in the man-made cellulosic supply chain, but those really happen at the supplier level, at a branded fiber level, at a facility level, which means that there are increasingly infinite numbers of materials and kind of varieties that can be assessed at that point. You have ZDHC certifications and all canopy audits, and all of these things could stack in any number of combinations. So we realized to realistically put out the tool, we couldn't do all of that at once. And that's where that kind of next step is going to look at, like, well, what does that actually look like? And in terms of, if you are a program that is at that kind of generic standard or initiative level, then we're really open to having conversations about including you, because this is an evolving tool. This is just version 1. We just couldn't do them all in the first version.
Yeah, thanks for that. Okay, I'm going to give us one more question because it seems like the questions have kind of slowed down a little bit. Do you plan to add non-textile fibers or materials such as plastic, wood, etc.? Sienna, you want to take that one? And I don't know, Diana, if you have a thought to that as well, but go ahead.
I mean, it's a good question. I would kind of just echo Ashley's point either. Like, I don't think we have any foregone conclusions about certain elements like that. I mean, we are a textile-based organization, so I think that's kind of going to be our driving principle in terms of what materials we cover, or like how is it relevant to our stakeholder community. But you never know how our framework might be expanded to support others.
Yeah. Okay, well, I don't think that there are any other questions. And so with that, I will say a very, very big thank you to Diana for joining us from your beautiful location, to Sienna for waking up so early, and all of you for joining us and for attending. Feel free to send us a note if you're interested in being part of the process. That's matrix@textileexchange.org. And with that, I will hand it back to Rose.
Wonderful. Thank you to our speakers, and thank you for participating in today's webinar. As a friendly reminder, an email will be sent to all registered participants with a link to today's presentation. That concludes our webinar. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks.